Chapter 67. Teo Varada. As Teo, Kaya, and Rat planeswalked back to Ravnica and Orzhova, Teo was focused on yet another new thing he'd never attempted before, maintaining his geometry around the Veil while planeswalking. He barely managed it, but he did manage it. He was more than a little proud of himself, and turned to get a little validation from Kaya and Rat, but as usual, the two women had collapsed after their shared journey through the blind eternities. Madame Blaze rushed to help her mistress, and before Teo could warn her, wound up tripping over the unseen Rat. Teo tried to help Rat while still maintaining his sphere of light around the chain veil, allowing a flustered Blaze to focus on getting Kaya to bed. Teo in turn helped Araethia to her room and helped her into her bed, which embarrassed him a bit, though he tried to hide that. It wasn't clear whether or not Rat noticed. She noticed most things, but right now she just seemed grateful.
"You know," she told him, "my life has opened up in so many ways since meeting you. I think you're my good luck charm." She added quickly, "And Kaya too, of course." "I feel exactly the same way about you," then he added quickly, "and Kaya too, of course." He left her to rest, coming out of Rat's room just as Blaze was exiting Kaya's and calling for more servants. Per her mistress, Blaze ordered one servant to inform acting Guildmaster Tomik Vrona that his true guildmaster was back. A second servant was sent to inform Chief Belagru. A third was to go to Niv Mizzet to inform the living guild pack that Guildmaster Kaya was calling for the Firemind to assemble all 10 guilds in the morning. Then glancing over at Teo, Madame Blaze summoned a fourth and commanded, "Bring a grounder so that young Master Varada may safely stow that presumably dangerous artifact for the night." Once the servants were dispatched, Blaze then took a deep breath and took a few steps toward Rat's room to see if I can be of any help to the poor girl. "I'm happy to interpret for you, Madame Blaze," Teo offered. "I appreciate that, but I am determined to learn how to be of some assistance to the child, which means I am equally determined to learn how to see the child." Teo said, "Well, she's in bed. Focus on her there." Blaze nodded and entered. Teo waited, assuming that he'd in fact be needed, but after a brief pause, Blaze came back out, stating definitively that Mistress Rat is gone. Teo smiled and told the servant, "She's there. You just can't see her. But don't feel bad. Most people can't." Blaze squinted at Teo, who realized that he had, perhaps, sounded slightly condescending. But before he could apologize, Madame handed him a note. "Going to see my mother. Be back tomorrow. Don't leave without me. Rat." Teo found himself rushing into the room. Rat was indeed gone, and the balcony door was now open. "Don't leave without me. Look who's talking." He sighed, apologizing profusely to Madame Blaze, and, still carefully maintaining his geometry around the veil, exited back into the corridor. A servant was waiting there with something called a grounder, made of something called water silver. A typical grounder, he was told, was designed to trap ghosts, but this model had been modified to contain cursed objects. Teo carefully lowered the chain veil into the grounder, and then released his sphere back into the aether. The servant sealed the grounder, and Teo gingerly carried it into his room. Standing in the doorway, Madame Blaze asked, "Can I get you anything, my boy?" "I could use a pot of chakra." "I'm afraid I don't know what that is." "A hot drink, strong and bitter. Helps you stay awake." "How am I going to get through the night without chakra?" She said, We have coffee. Sounds much the same.
Coffee then, please, madame. He sank with a groan into an overstuffed chair. He knew he wouldn't be getting much sleep this night, not with the chain veil to guard, but he could, at least, take a load off his admittedly aching feet. Blaze smiled and nodded and closed the door behind her. Teo stared at the grounder, but his thoughts were all on Arathia Shokta. Don't leave without me. Like I'd ever go anywhere without her ever again. Chapter 68. At Costar. At Costar was happy to be useful to Lazov, who hadn't given him an assignment in 2 or 3 days at least. Atkos hated letting his skills rust for even that long. What good is being Demir's top assassin if the boss doesn't want anyone dead? Fortunately, the boss now had someone who indeed needed to die. But the Demir guildmaster had made himself very clear. The hit must take place in the morning, during the meeting of the Living Guild Pack and the 10 guilds. As an afterthought, the spy master had added, and don't drink any blood. No one must know that a vampire was behind this kill. That was disappointing, of course, but there would be other opportunities to feed when the job was done. So Atkos simply took up position and settled in for the long night and the longer wait. Chapter 69. Tomik Vrana. Madame Blaze came out of Kaya's bedroom and said, "She will see you now." Despite feeling fairly confident, Kaya would be pleased with what he had to tell her. Tomik was nevertheless a great big ball of nerves. Despite feeling fairly confident, Kaya would be pleased with what he had to tell her. Tomik was nevertheless a great big ball of nerves. He and Belagru exchanged a quick look and entered. "Is this giant nervous?" Kaya was in bed, eating breakfast from a tray. She looked tired. Still, she looks better than my poor Ral did. It had taken the healer half the night to repair Ral's injuries, and even when she was finished, Ral still looked like one big bruise. One big bruise with a shaved head. Tomik had been forced to shave it to remove all the black gunk stuck there. That doesn't matter. Hair grows back. Still, it left Ral looking particularly raw and vulnerable. But he was sleeping now. He'd be all right. Tomik had placed Tezzeret's arm in plain view so Ral could see it when he woke and remembered his victory. Kaya said to Tomik, "You look tired." "Me? No, I'm fine." "I know the Orzhov contracts must be a burden on you." "No, really. I'm growing used to them, and you must think I'm taking advantage of your generosity. And I am truly sorry about this, but I need to take one more planeswalk after the guild meeting this morning before I can take those burdens back." "Actually," Tomik said, feeling a little victorious, "that won't be necessary." He proceeded to explain the new plan for syndicate leadership, and she listened with an expression that he couldn't quite read. "Somewhere between dubious and relieved, maybe?" She said, "So I'd remain guildmaster in name only, while you continue to act as acting guildmaster, as de facto guildmaster. We'll need to come up with a better title for me to sell the idea to the faithful, but essentially, yes. I mean, if you're all right with it." She didn't answer right away, and Tomik's nervousness returned. He started to defend the idea and hoped he wasn't simply babbling. "I'm not too much for tooting my own horn, but I believe I accomplished quite a bit in the short time you were away, not the least of which was making progress, even peace, with both Teysa Karlov and the Triumvirate." Kaya's gaze fell upon the giant, and Belagru quickly confirmed that Tomik still had his support, and the support of the Orzhov armed forces. Kaya asked, "Are you sure about this? Because I have to admit,
I love this plan so much, I feel extremely guilty about accepting it. Do not feel even a little bit guilty. I'm glad you love the plan, because, well, simply put, I love my guild, and I believe that he glanced up at Belagro and corrected himself, that we can follow the example you've set, the work you began to make the Orzhov better. We'll still keep charge of Ravnica's financial interests, its necessary regulations, loans, and collections, but we'll do it without breaking the faithful for generations. I certainly can't think of anyone better qualified for the task, Kaya said, which was a great relief to Tomik. Neither can I, said Belagro. He gently patted Tomik on the top of his head, and in a vaguely paternal manner that felt a bit like a hammer was driving Tomik's skull down into his chest cavity. Trying not to look too pained for the giant's sake, Tomik reiterated to Kaya, I still need you to stop by Ravnica occasionally for ceremonial functions. I'm happy to do that. I like Ravnica. She reached out her hand. Tomik approached the bed and held out his own. She squeezed it. I've made good friends on this world, including the both of you. Besides, Rat will want to come home periodically and see her parents, I'm sure. Tomik still felt the need to confirm. So you're really alright with this? I am if you are. They squeezed each other's hands again. Then, a smiling Tomik departed with Chief Enforcer Belagro, proud to be the permanent acting guildmaster of the Orzhov Syndicate, or whatever his new title would turn out to be. Chapter 70. Verushka. The statue/corpse of Isperia still loomed over the proceedings of the Azorius Senate House, where once again Niv Mizzet had called a meeting of the 10 guilds. Verushka believed the venue continued to be chosen on purpose to embarrass her or intimidate her with evidence of her great crime. Verushka resented the lack of respect for the Golgari and its queen, but in fact, the more time passed, the more Verushka reveled in her decision to kill Isperia for her great crimes. The Gorgon wasn't sorry she'd killed the damned Sphinx, nor was she embarrassed or intimidated. And let's face it, Lavinia is a much more reasonable choice for Azorius Guildmaster than Isperia, or Ban ever was. In the final analysis, I did all of Ravnica a great favor. It was a much bigger crowd than at the previous meetings. Clearly, some guild officials had been told of the assassination plans for Ban, Ves, and Tezzeret as a fait accompli when it was too late to change course. Niv Mizzet was there, of course, glorying in his new role as a glorified master of ceremonies. Lavinia stood on one side of Isperia to represent Azorius, while Aurelia waited on the other, representing Boros. Hekara had replaced Ixava as the Rakdos representative. When asked why by Lavinia, Hekara said Ixava was under the weather. Also under a trapeze act, being used as their living net. Not sure why. The boss said something about her embarrassing the cult by losing a talent competition against a couple of amateurs. Kaya, Teo, Tomik, and Belagro were all there, representing Orzhov, but so were the Triumvirate and Teysa Karlov. Verushka was a bit surprised everyone in the syndicate was so chummy all of a sudden. Much as she liked Kaya, and generally wished her well, she found she preferred it when the other guilds had more internal disarray. It kept her eyes turned inward, keeping the Golgari out of their sights. Vorel and Vanifar were there for Simic. Borborigmos and Gan Shokta represented the Gruul clans, while Celestia was covered by Boruvo and Emara. A scowling Marie and a dour Ral stood for Izzet. The latter had shaved his head, making him look more like a prisoner of war than a guild master. A few off-world planeswalkers were also present,
including Vivian Reed, the Wanderer, and of course, Chandra. Vraska nodded knowingly to Chandra, who looked slightly confused before nodding back, which gave Vraska pause. Then, unsurprisingly, another Chandra arrived, forcing the first Chandra to shapeshift into Lazov. Vraska wondered why the Demir guildmaster bothered with this repetitive charade, but she supposed it made him feel important and powerful, or perhaps it taught him something. After all, he now knew there was some understanding between the pyromancer and the Golgari queen.
Well, fine. The truth behind that will be revealed soon enough anyway.
Per Dovinbon stingily provided advice, Vraska had brought Huntmaster Miksil Savadzunich, or simply Mike, as he preferred to be called. The elf had been surprised and gratified to be chosen over Storev Asdomos, Varols, or Sevraya. It was an easy concession to the young Mike's vanity, further cementing his loyalty to Vraska over Izani.
Ban was right, as usual.
Vraska saw that Teo had the chain veil in a sphere of light, while Ral had Tezzeret's arm. It was clear the other two assassins had done their jobs. For a moment, she considered what she was about to do. The part of her that loved Jace knew their lives would be less complicated if she took another path today. But the part of her that loved the Golgari believed this was the best way forward for her people, and thus her decision was confirmed, made, and solidified. Looking around, Vraska half expected Jace to show, but so far he was staying away, which was just as well. Best to keep him at some distance from this aspect of her life.
The aspect that might hurt him.
When all had assembled, the living guild pack nodded to Kaya, who stepped forward into an Azorius Verity circle.
I killed the woman known as Liliana Vess. As proof of kill, I offered this.
As Vraska had presumed, Kaya indicated the chain veil in Teo's sphere. A clearly relieved Teo handed it over to Niv Mizzet, who had the boy lower it into some kind of puzzle box, which the dragon then sealed for safekeeping.
But who'd keep it safe from the dragon? I'd best look into that.
Verl asked,
Can an artifact be used as proof that the woman is dead?
Lavinia stated,
The Liliana I knew would only give up the veil over her dead body.
To Vraska's surprise, Chandra stepped forward too.
Liliana is dead. Jace, Jaya, and I saw her corpse on Dominaria.
She nodded toward Kaya, who scowled, perhaps not appreciating that she was being checked up on. Chandra concluded by saying,
We received a Jace-tested report from an eyewitness who confirmed that Kaya stabbed Liliana in the back with her daggers.
Vraska didn't know Chandra well, but she had never heard the woman sound so cold. It seemed especially strange, since she knew from Jace that Chandra had once cared a great deal for Liliana. Jace was an even bigger concern. Vraska didn't like that he had to go through all that, even down to seeing her dead body, the body of a woman he'd once loved, and she really didn't like that her witness Chandra was also acting as an after-the-fact witness for Kaya as well.
It seems too convenient.
But there was nothing to be done about that now. As soon as Kaya stepped out of the Verity circle, Vraska stepped into it and brandished, Dovinbon's calcified hand.
This is, or rather was, the right hand of Dovinbon.
Without a word, Lavinia held out her hand for Vraska's proof. The Golgari queen gave it to her, and Lavinia performed a brief arcane ritual over it. A small spectral image of Ban appeared over the stretched skin and bones of the severed appendage. Lavinia nodded and stated for the crowd,
This is indeed the hand of Dovinbon.
The firemind said, "State for the record that you killed Ban." With a dark glance at Chandra, Vraska begrudgingly stated,
"I am forced to confess that I did not."
There was a brief murmur of surprise from the crowd as Vraska removed herself from the Verity circle, only to be quickly replaced by a stone-faced Chandra Nalaar. The Gorgon caught Rao's look of sympathy, pity most likely, but looked away. Chandra said,
"I killed Ban, over grudges old and new. I believe Vraska should be credited for the kill, as she was prepared to do your will and slay Ban herself when I acted. Besides, I never would have been there if Vraska hadn't brought me along."
Vraska was briefly anxious over that last detail.
"Again, too convenient."
But no one else seemed concerned, and Niv Mizzet offered, "The Living Guild Pack is willing to credit Vraska with the kill. What say the guilds of Ravnica?" The 9 other guilds said aye. Vraska waited a dramatic beat, then nodded to Mike, who piped up with,
"The Golgari also says aye."
"Then it is unanimous," the dragon said. Chandra turned to Vraska and asked,
"Satisfied?"
Vraska nodded. She didn't like that Chandra was making it seem like they had some kind of arrangement between them.
"Even if we did..."
And somewhere in the back of her mind, Vraska also didn't like Chandra's changed demeanor. This was one of Jace's best friends, someone he viewed as a younger sister. She was clearly in pain, a pain that ran deep, which was a kind of pain Vraska well understood. The Gorgon berated herself for involving Chandra in her schemes. But when Chandra planeswalked away in flame right then and there, Vraska mostly just felt relief. She was glad Chandra wouldn't be sticking around to overthink what took place on Regatha. So ultimately, Vraska indeed felt very satisfied. The Golgari was at peace with the other guilds, freeing up Vraska to consolidate her power within the swarm, at which point she would lead its ascent over all of Ravnica.
All thanks to the death of Dovin Baan.
Chapter 71. Dovin Baan. Dovin Baan was alone in his Ravnican safe house, waiting for Vraska to return. Not that he wasn't keeping busy in the meantime. He was using his thopters to fashion a mechanical right hand to replace the hand the Gorgon had taken. After that, he would set to work on creating some magical, mechanical devices to replace his lost eyes. His thopters all had optics, so he believed it should not be too difficult once he figured out this interface. Baan was mildly annoyed with Vraska for cutting off his hand. It had not been part of his plan, but he could not deny the wisdom of her action. Hard evidence of his demise would certainly lend credence to Vraska and Nalaar's story, and if the Golgari Queen had told him of her intent in advance, he might have been reluctant to comply. Baan was in fact slightly embarrassed that his own fear of further mutilation had blinded him to the need for such an action, and in any case, learning to perfect himself with no eyes and only one hand would be an interesting, if not brief, challenge. Beyond that, Regatha had gone exactly as he expected it to go. For Baan, it was child's play to get Nalaar to attempt to incinerate him, and simple enough to let the conflagration hide his planeswalking, while a pre-planned thopter projected an illusion of light, depicting his charred corpse sinking into the lava. Now his safety was assured, and his mind would be occupied as raising the unruly Golgari to perfection presented an intriguing and tantalizingly complex puzzle. Baan noticed a slight rise in the temperature in the room.
"Is someone there?"
"Vraska!" he called out. There was no response. Baan listened for a breath, for a heartbeat. Nothing. No one was there. Dovin Baan decided
It was the inconsistent Ravnican weather combined with the shoddy construction of the building. He would have to create something to regulate the temperature of his domicile. The thought of making his new home more efficient brought a smile to his face.